as opposed to the incorrect, untruthful direction? That's really the question. And I don't know. A lot of that depends on how smart the voting public is. If the voting public has done their own homework and they have studied the public policy positions of the two candidates, then they'll probably make a pretty good decision. But if they are relying on 30-second sound bites on the radio or on TV or internet information, which may come from foreign sources like communist China or dictatorial Russia or what have you, then they're less likely to make the correct and wise decision.
Do you think that the Harris and the Trump campaigns, they've ran or they made a lot? I mean, we've talked about Trump and his strategic error, the debate divide, but what about the Harris campaign? Is she made some errors in this?
Well, they've both made errors, but that's typical of all campaigns. I've yet to see a campaign that was perfectly run. So I want to be fair to both the Trump and the Harris people when I talk about them having made errors. Plentiful of errors in every campaign. And I can guarantee you that every losing campaign's quarterbacks and coaches, they huddle afterwards and they try to figure out what they need to do to correct those errors come the next campaign. So, again, we'll see how it all plays out and who's made the most errors. But I'll tell you what it really comes down to fundamentally is this. If Kamala Harris's team is able to get voters to think primarily about the awful character of Donald Trump, then Kamala Harris is going to win. On the other hand, if the Trump campaign is able to get the voters to think about, when they vote, the public policy positions of a Marxist candidate, Kamala Harris, then Donald Trump's going to win. And that's really the battleground. I think you've noted in the past week or two an intensity of scrutiny on the human frailties of Donald Trump, the bad character that he has, the dishonesty that he propagates. Just go down the list. And at the same time, the Donald Trump campaign is trying to get Harris to focus on public policy issues that Donald Trump easily gets votes on. And so we'll find out tomorrow which campaign was successful in getting the focus on what they want the focus to be on amongst the voters when they go vote.
Is it going to turn a lot on? I guess who can have the best ground game as far as getting their people to the polls?
Oh, that is always critical to every campaign. Any campaign that gets 100% of their supporters to the polls, if they've got any campaign at all, any quality candidate at all, they win every single time. Typically, a campaign is able to get 60, 70, 80% of their people to the polls. Sometimes in special elections, it's as low as 10, 15, 20% of their supporters to the polls. So if you can push up to 80, 90, 100% of the people who support your candidate, that is a huge difference. And that's one of the reasons why both campaigns are focusing on the frailties of their opponent, because typically in campaigns, hate motivates people to vote more so than love. And so if there's something about Kamala Harris that you hate, say her position on border security or on law and order or on her Marxist view of the economy, if the campaign can get voters to think about those things that they hate about Kamala Harris on election day, well, then those voters will make an extra effort to go vote. Same thing for Kamala Harris. She's going to try to get voters to think on Donald Trump being a convicted felon, on Donald Trump's history of dishonesty, perhaps his adultery. Just go down the list of things that Donald Trump being the showman. Sometimes he does these things on purpose just to get a rise out of people or to be entertaining. So you never know for sure with Donald Trump when he's serious about what he says or when he's just joking about what he says. And of course, the Kamala Harris campaign, they will try to portray everything Donald Trump does that is bad as serious as all get out. So again, it comes down to what the voters are thinking about: character or public policy issues. If they think public policy issues And if they believe in the principles that have made America great, Donald Trump wins handily. But if they think about the rather sordid character traits of Donald Trump when they go vote, then Kamala Harris will win handily.
Speaking of a show, the Madison Square Garden event, Tony Hinchcliffe, whatever his name is, how the media made this a big deal, saying Puerto Rico's an island of garbage. I mean, does that really reach the level of racism? Because racism is degenerating people because of their race. The joke about the sexual joke, I get that if that was offensive, but I didn't. I didn't think that was a big deal what he said about Puerto Rico. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think it is a big deal in a close election. That is one of the issues that not only motivates a segment of American society to go vote, but also to vote for a particular candidate. And so the Donald Trump campaign made a major error by allowing that speaker in a closing argument event to make that kind of outrageous statement. Now, similarly, you've got Joe Biden referring to Trump supporters as garbage. That does not sway people to vote for Donald Trump, but it does motivate Trump supporters to go vote. So it helps with the get out the vote effort of the Donald Trump campaign. The Puerto Rican comments they do both. It not only motivates voters to vote for a particular candidate, it motivates people to turn out and vote. So for that one, that's a twofer for the Kamala Harris campaign. Why the insults cast by the Harris-Biden team against Donald Trump motivate people to go vote, but it does not necessarily convert the undecideds.
I'm glad you said that. About President Biden, was that on purpose? I mean, he comes out there after her moment in the sun. She's waited for her whole life and steals her thunder by saying that.
I don't think it was on the part of Joe Biden, because I think he lacks the mental capacity to be that strategic. I think he's just bumbling through things and he's searching for words, and garbage happened to be the word that came to mind. You know, as you get to be more and more senile, your filters become less and less effective. And so he probably thinks that kind of thought on a regular basis, probably did when he was lucid, but when he was more lucid, he at least had a filter that kept him from saying those kinds of remarks.
So, a couple questions here. I've seen people say, or media say, early voting's favoring Trump. It's not, and I look and I see that, since last time, his numbers have improved some as opposed to 2020, where I think 17% of his voters were early voters. Is early voting, is that really that big of a deal, or does that make it that, or is it really important to get your people out early?
Well, it's really important for you to get your voters to vote early, not the people who are undecided, not the people who are for your opponent. So if you are turning out your voters, then yeah, that's important, because a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. If you've got your voter who's already voted, you don't have to worry about turning that person out on election day. You don't have to worry about there being a hurricane or thunderstorms or bad rain or an earthquake or other natural disaster that might keep those people from voting if they've already voted. And so, yeah, early turnout for you as a candidate is really good. Now, there's been record numbers of people who have voted early. I personally think that is not a good idea for a voter to vote early, because what you've basically done is kept yourself somewhat ignorant of whatever information may come up between the days or weeks or months between the time that you voted and election day. But having said that, if they want to vote early and they're voting for Trump, well, gosh, that's good for Donald Trump. But nobody knows with any degree of confidence how these people who have turned out and already voted have voted, because their votes aren't counted, and it's a secret ballot. You might have a judgment or an idea or a good guess or an inkling, something like that, but nobody knows for sure how those folks voted until those votes are counted.
Excellent answer on those. Speaking of, I asked you a while ago about the negative campaigning. Somebody told me this a while back. I never thought of it, that when you're doing this negative ads, that you're not really trying to increase your percentage, but you're trying to suppress your opponent's vote. Is that true?
Well, both are true.
Okay.
You're trying to increase your percentage by getting people to dislike your opponent to the point where they want to vote for you and they're motivated to go vote. Okay. At the same time, you're trying to discourage the incentive for your opponent's supporters to go vote. You try to dispirit them with the negative campaigning. That's the way the strategy works. Now, whether it's always successful is an open question. Often these kinds of attacks backfire, particularly when they are dishonest, when there's not truth to the accusation, and the falsity of the accusation has been revealed to the satisfaction of the voter. When that happens, then it's like a campaign has tossed a hand grenade into their own camp.
Do you think I've heard of watch this guy Harry Enton on CNN a lot? He's kind of a stat guy. And he thinks that this race could be decided where all 7 battlegrounds go to the other. Do you think that we could see that?
I can see one candidate winning all 7 of the battlegrounds. Yes, that could happen, and that's because of how unreliable the polling data is. But we also have to question what a battleground state is. For example, Iowa has been in the red column from day one. It was solid red, not even lean red, but solid red. It was a gimme for Donald Trump. And then the Des Moines Press Register, which usually is the gold standard for polling in the state of Iowa, recently, just within the last couple of days, comes out with a poll where they say Kamala Harris, blue candidate, is ahead by 3 points. So always take the polling with a grain of salt. The only thing that counts is what is counted by the vote counters on election day and after the election day. That's all that matters. The polling, I think the public's starting to figure this out, the polling is educated guesswork. It tends to indicate where the voters are, but because the margin of error is so large, particularly in a close race, it should not give anyone any degree of certainty about who's going to win or lose.
Yeah, I've never seen the outliers in polling like this, where you see one day 6 and the next day 5 with Trump. I've never seen them that far. So I know this may be a tough
Well,
question
there's a
right here.
reason for that. Some of the polling is done for partisan reasons. There is in politics what's known as a bandwagon effect. A lot of undecideds just like to go with whoever's going to win because they feel, well, those other folks must know what they're talking about. And so that's the candidate that's winning right now. That's who I'm going to vote for. You know, there's some deferential voting. And so if a campaign or a political party is able to put out a poll that makes their candidate look like they're going to win, well, that increases the likelihood that their voters will turn out because they want to vote for the guy who's going to win and be a part of that winning team. It also tends to discourage the opponent's voters to turn out because of a sense of hopelessness. Well, it's not going to make any difference. My person's going to lose, so why go vote? So to some degree, these polls that are promoted by the different political parties are designed to be self-fulfilling prophecies by affecting the actual vote on election day. Now, how do you separate those that are biased like that from the ones that are diligent and properly done with good methodology? That's a question I can't answer.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I've been wondering the last few days about when I look at Emerson, or excuse me, Morning Consult or Bloomberg, and then Rasmussen on the other side. I'm like, you know, why are they doing this? But now that makes sense about the bandwagon and suppressing the other guys. Those are the first two that I'll look at when I'm looking like Real Clear Politics. Okay, I'm throwing Rasmussen out, I'm throwing Bloomberg out. Now let me see what New York Times says.
Well, Rasmussen to me is very questionable. They may be right, but they're very questionable. I raise my eyebrows when I see a poll that for probably a month or two at least has most of the time had Donald Trump with a 2-point lead, occasionally 1 or 3 points. But for polling in the heat of a campaign, with all the revelations that are coming forth, to only vary by 1 point or 2 points, that is really unusual. So I don't know what methodology Rasmussen is using. Sometimes they've got it right, sometimes they've got it wrong. But I just note the consistency in their polling this year that I've not seen with anybody else's polling.
They had something I was reading about a couple of weeks ago with them, and they put out their accuracy in 2020. I think or maybe it's one of the polls here recently or election years it improved a lot. And they said they were using the same sample that they did, or the same demographic sample, but they had doubled it, so or increased it. So they're claiming they're going to be a lot more accurate this year. I guess we'll see.
Well, all the pollsters claim that so that they'll get paid money to run polls. That's their livelihood.
What do you think about Atlas Intel?
I don't know enough about the methodology of Atlas Intel to be able to answer that. Don't have a long-term familiarity with Atlas Intel, although they have risen to some degree of prominence during this election cycle. Talk to me after the election, and I'll see how right or wrong they are. Then I can give you my evaluation. Again, I take all these polls with a grain of salt, particularly if it's a close election. You know, if polls are consistently showing a candidate up by 10 points, you can have a pretty good degree of comfort as to who's going to win. But when you're talking about candidates winning or losing by 1, 2, or 3 points, that's a whole different matter. And then to make it even more challenging, who cares what the national polling is? You know, mathematically, it is possible for a candidate to be elected president with 26% of the popular vote, if you just place that 26% in the right places, because it's not the popular vote that elects a president of the United States. Rather, it's the Electoral College. So if you place that 26% of the popular vote in the right states to give you 270 Electoral College votes, and you can get 0 votes in every other state, you can be elected president.
Wow, is the 26% is that number? I didn't know it was.
Now, keep in mind that it's highly, highly, highly improbable that a candidate's going to say get 0 votes in California and then get 51% of the vote in every other state they need to get to 270 Electoral College votes.
Interesting. I remember you saying one time that about Donald Trump, he's his own worst enemy. How frustrating must it have been for his campaign aides? Like he said, came out the other day and said something about he was the protector of women. I mean, that's got to just run you crazy saying stuff like that, doesn't it?
Well, it has to. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has a reputation of taking advantage of women in a lot of different ways, particularly sexually. He has a long history of being a serial adulterer with his wives. Doesn't make any difference if they're a Playboy bunny or a porn star or someone he meets in a retail establishment someplace. That history is pretty well established. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have a huge gender gap in favor of Kamala Harris. That and Kamala Harris is running to be the first female president in the history of the United States. But you've got, what, a 14, 15, 16, 17 point gender gap in favor of Kamala Harris amongst women, and a similar gender gap for Donald Trump amongst men. And I don't think we've ever had gender gaps that big for 2 different candidates in the exact opposite ways as you're seeing this election cycle.
How do you think abortion is more important or less important than what an issue the campaigns thought it was going to be?
No, it's an important issue, and there are a significant percentage of voters who vote based on that issue and no other, to the exclusion of all other issues. Now, I don't know exactly what that percentage might be, but when you're talking about a cliffhanger race, if abortion is the key litmus test issue for 5, 10, 15% of the voting population, abortion could be the issue that decides the outcome. And this election will help determine whether America is pro-life or pro-abortion.
If Donald Trump becomes the next president and Republicans take House and Senate, does that end abortion as an issue for a while? Because if they're not going to turn out to this election,
it is a perpetual issue until a sizable majority of the public becomes pro-abortion or pro-life. Until that happens, where there is a consistency in every state in the United States, it's going to be a hot button issue. Heck, I've been in politics often as a candidate for 44 years. And during almost all that period of time, Roe versus Wade rendered abortion as an issue mute under the United States Constitution, according to that Supreme Court decision. Yet it still was an issue in every single election that I participated in. So yeah, it's a big one, and it's a big one because it is a litmus test issue for some percentage of voters, which in a close race can determine who wins and loses. There's not, say, a 51% pro-life come hell or high water, or 51% pro-abortion come hell or high water kind of vote, where it alone determines the outcome, but it does sway the minds of a lot of voters.
I was reading something the other day about the Supreme Court justice, or the Supreme Court decision with gerrymandering, and about independent legislators. I don't know how familiar you are with this or read it, but they said according to this ruling that the Supreme Court justice, if this election is challenged, could decide a race, national race. Have you heard anything about that?
No, the Supreme Court doesn't have the lawful authority to decide any race for the United States Congress, the United States Senate, or the President of the United States, period, end of subject. Now,
Okay.
they can affect the outcome, like occurred in Gore v. Bush in the year 2000, where the Democrats were re-examining ballots in Florida, and they had one system for determining whether a vote went for a particular candidate in Democrat areas that was different from whether a hanging Chad or a ballot went for a Republican candidate in a Republican part of the state. And the Supreme Court did intervene and pronounce, look, under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, you got to count the ballots the same way throughout the state. You can't count them one way when it helps Democrats, but a different way when it would help Republicans. That violates the United States Constitution. But even in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court did not pronounce who won the presidential race, did not pronounce who won the state of Florida. It just said you had to count them the same way. It's the United States Congress that is the final judge, jury, and arbiter of who is elected to the United States Congress, the United States Senate, and the presidency. And that's in the Constitution. It's clear as day. And that's the end of that subject.
Great, thank you. Couple more questions here. The looks like the Senate and the House is going to hang on just a couple thousand votes. Is the candidates that's running for, does this hinge on the top of the ticket too? And the reason I ask that is because I look at Pennsylvania, and Senator Casey, he's running ads with President Trump. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, the top of the ticket always affects the lower parts of the ticket. If the top of the ticket wins in a landslide, that tends to help the political party of the candidate that is winning in a landslide. So in this instance, where Trump wins, yeah, that's going to help Republican candidates. Where Kamala Harris wins, that's going to help Democrat candidates. That has always been the case. How much it will affect races around the country right now is really undetermined, in large part because, at least as things stand today, based on polling data that may or may not be accurate, the race looks razor thin, which in turn suggests that you'll have a razor thin majority for one part or the other in the House and a similar outcome in the Senate. Although I will add that it looks like the Republicans will pick up 2 Senate seats, one in West Virginia and one in Montana, which gives us a working majority of 51, unless the Democrats are able to unseat Republican candidates in, say, Nebraska or Texas or wherever.
Yeah, I'll ask a question about that. Just speaking of, do you think Senator Cruz is in trouble? I've seen some very tight polling out there with him.
Well, okay, as a person who's run for public office a number of times, you always think you're in trouble until you have won. Okay, that's the mindset. You got to always be thinking that it's a real close race and you're a little bit behind. And if you work a little bit harder, you'll be a little bit ahead. So when we won with 70% of the vote or 80% of the vote in some of the elections that I was involved in, my wife would often quip to people, well, look, Mo's the only one who thinks the other guy has a chance. And that was true. And I tried to minimize our errors and maximize our opportunities in order to push that percentage up as high as it could be, whether it be 51% or 82% or 83%, whatever the number might be. So, we'll see how it plays out in this instance. But with respect to Ted Cruz, he's running like he's got a very tight race, and that's exactly how he should be running.
Now, I know me and you discussed this one time in depth, and I've seen several new headlines here about voter fraud. I mean, are we facing that again? Is Donald Trump setting us up to challenge the race?
The Democrats have a long history of committing voter fraud. They have a long history of preventing laws from being passed that would help ensure the sanctity of the ballot box. So, yeah, there'll be voter fraud, and that's another unknown because polls don't measure voter fraud. But the Democrats will engage in voter fraud. They'll do it in a lot of different ways. And the question is whether it'll be enough to determine the outcome.
Do you think Donald Trump will accept the results if he loses, or is he set us up to contest it again?
Well, unless he's slaughtered, he'll contest it.
What about Kamala Harris? Do you think she would?
Well, historically, the Democrats have contested presidential elections more times than the Republicans have, although you wouldn't know that by paying attention to the news media. So Kamala Harris might, if it's close. Let's wait and see.
Have did you ever? I know she's probably coming in your last term. Did you ever meet Senator Harris? Was you around her?
Not very often, but yes, we did meet.
Is she how she appears on TV, speaking in private? I mean, I've listened to her. She can't get through 2 sentences without repeating herself.
Well, in a casual conversation, it's much different than when you're on TV.
Right.
And she is conversant. If you were to have a dinner with her at a dinner table, she'd seem fine.
So, looks like that. I know we touched on this a while ago about the states, but why do you think that from 2000, I guess from 1988 to 2016, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they were solidly blue, and now we've seen them move to purplish states? Is it because the Democrats have went so far out to left field that middle class people don't relate with them anymore?
Probably 2 or 3 reasons. One, the Democratic Party more and more often has become more and more racist and anti-white. The Democratic Party has also taken public policy positions that are anti-male. And so you've got a lot of white males, blue collar workers, maybe union workers in some of these industrial states that have started voting Republican more and more often. Then you can throw into the mix economic positions of Republicans versus economic positions of Democrats. The Democrats are becoming the Marxist party. And unfortunately, Marxism, communism has never worked. Socialism has never worked in any nation that's ever tried it. If the definition of working is enough money produced by the economy for both a good safety net for people who are impoverished and a strong military. And then you've got moral values. The Democrat Party has evolved into an anti-Christian, anti-moral values party, standing for really weird things like biology, which is a science, is not determinative of your sex. I mean, that's just plain dumb. And that offends people. And it also makes people, voters, question other things Democrats say if they can't figure out the difference between something as basic as whether a person is a man or a woman.
Yeah, I never thought I would be looking at that. So, you said something caught my attention about the Democrats becoming more racist. I don't know if you kept up. I've seen the headlines in that second congressional district with Alabama political reporter Josh Moon and Bill Britt, and their Republican candidate Caroline Dobson. She came up the other day and had to denounce her KKK ties, which I believe her because it had to do with her great grandfather Have you seen that?
Well, it doesn't surprise me. Both Bill Britt and Josh Moon are extraordinarily dishonest people. They're highly partisan, and there are no filters on what they're going to say in order to advance a political agenda. At least they're not as bad as other communists or Marxists or socialists, keeping in mind that in places like China with Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, or Russia with Lenin versus the White Russians, and before that, the Tsars, they exterminated millions upon millions of people. In Cambodia, the communists killed 35% of the population. Roughly 3 million Cambodians were murdered out of a population of about 8 million. Okay. So at least Josh Moon and Bill Britt aren't that bad, but that gives you an idea as to how committed these Marxists and socialists and communists are to their ideology.
Yeah, that's the stupidest thing I've seen this whole election cycle. It came from the paper, the publication, The Grios is where it started at. A guy named Michael Harriet wrote an article in which he seemed like a lot of time researching her family back to the 1840s.
Well, one of the political strategies is to get some politically favored media outlet to publish or present an attack article on an opponent that has no basis in truth or fact whatsoever. Okay. And then the campaign will quote it as if it was true, with the campaign's fallback being, well, we didn't do the investigation, but these people are saying that. And that gives them cover for the falsity of the accusation, even if it was the campaign that planted the false story. We saw that a lot in my Senate race, by the way, with Katie Britt, using third parties to publish false accusations that the campaign or the super PAC for the campaign would then pounce on and portray me in an entirely false image. But that's the nature of politics these days. And it's only gotten worse with the lack of any kind of honesty or checks on honesty and dishonesty on the internet.
I was talking to one of the state's most well-known journalists the other day about that, and I said, Mo seems really nice and have come to grips with this, and I said, I'd still be bitter. And that guy, he said, I'd be waking up at night mad as hell over what Katie Britt did. He said, with the lies they planted on mobrooks.
Well, give credit where credit's due. Her campaign was very dishonest, but they had $40 million with which to be dishonest, and they got away with it. And that's not at all unusual in politics. I wish it wasn't that way, but those of us who try to stick to the truth do our absolute best, because that's the way we were raised. That puts us at a disadvantage in a lot of these political arenas, particularly when the special interest funding is all going in one direction to a candidate who is a special interest lobbyist for most of her career.
$40 million. That's how much money did you have versus that?
It was less than 10. I don't remember the exact amount right offhand, but I'd put it somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 10, which, by the way, is pretty significant. But it's nothing like special interests rallied behind Katie Britt with, and that also explains a lot of her votes. And you've got a contrast between what Katie Britt and her communications people tried to project her as, and then what in fact she is. But hey, that's not new to politics.
Hey, a couple of questions here. This kind of got me thinking about another race. I've heard that there's a lot of people that's upset with Robin Lydecker for running against Terry Sewell, because Terry's now basically funded to get out the vote operation with everybody in Jefferson County, and now she's running with Shamari Figures running ads down there in the second district, and think that she's fixing to cost everybody the race in Shelby County. Jefferson County, maybe flip that race. Do you think there's, because she's raising just enough noise, that now Representative Sewell, instead of spending her money in other Democratic races across the nation winning favor with Democrats, she's spending it here? Is there some races like the second, 7th district that Republicans should let let sleeping dogs lie, or should there always be a contest for some, or have a strong contest for those races?
Well, Terry Sewell is far and away the most radical leftist in the Alabama delegation in Washington, D.C. So I'm thankful that the Republican Party ran someone against Terry Sewell. Everybody had the opportunity to run who lives in that congressional district. For that matter, everybody had the opportunity to run who lives in the state of Alabama, since you don't have to live in a congressional district to run for Congress. As odd as that may seem, you just have to live in the state. That's embedded in the United States Constitution. And Robin Lydecker was the best candidate to surface to run. So if anybody wants to complain, well, if they think they're better than Robin Lydecker, they should have run. And I wish Robin Lydecker the best. Now, it's an uphill battle, but you should not give someone as radical left as Terry Sewell a free ride. She'll help out. She'll help out with her socialist and communist allies across the country and in the state of Alabama. And if you make her spend money in Alabama, that's money she's not spending helping leftists win the House of Representatives around the United States.
Hey, that's a good that's a good response to that. I didn't think about that angle when it was first brought up to me. Okay, so what other question? Oh yeah, what do you think about the Republican candidate in North Carolina for governor? Do you think he could end up, instead of Donald Trump riding his coattails, he costing Donald Trump that race?
Well, ask me on Wednesday or Thursday. If he wins, he was a good candidate. If he gets beat bad, he wasn't a good candidate.
All right,
I understand that he's been accused of some rather odd things. That's normal in campaigns, that you get accused of some rather odd things. Hopefully, he's been able to rebut or temper the effects of those accusations. Time will tell. It's unfortunate that we did not run a better candidate, but he was Trump's candidate. So Donald Trump has no one to blame but himself if this candidate drags down the Republican Party in North Carolina so much that it costs Donald Trump North Carolina. Personally, I think that under normal circumstances, Donald Trump would win North Carolina. I am concerned about the effect of Hurricane Helene on the vote in areas of the state that are pretty solidly red, except for that little blue dot called Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville is a blue enclave, but outside of Asheville, in the more rural areas of the Appalachians and the Smokies, that's a solid red vote. And I hope that things have improved enough to where people turn out in large numbers for a presidential race. We'll find out on Wednesday whether Hurricane Helene determined who won and who lost North Carolina.
Okay, two more here. Do you see our country staying this divided, or do you think we'll start moving to the right or to the left?
Well, I believe that if we had run a better candidate like Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley or Ted Cruz, or just go down the list of good people that we have in the party, we would be winning this election in a landslide based on public policy positions of Kamala Harris that are gosh awful for the United States of America. But unfortunately, the Republicans have run a candidate who has a horrible personal character reputation that has enabled the Democrats to divert public attention from public policy, which is most important, to personality and character traits that are a real drag on the Republican ticket. So, you know, it'd be a sad day if the Republicans lost because we nominated such a badly flawed personal character, so bad that people overlooked the public policy differences between the two candidates and voted for Kamala Harris just because, by way of example, they just can't stomach there being a convicted felon in the Oval Office of the White House.
Sorry, you said that made me think one more. Do you think if the Democrats had a better candidate besides Kamala, they would have a bigger lead over Trump, or is the Democrats so locked into their ideology that it wouldn't matter?
If the Democrats had run a moderate, then they would be in a far better position. But the Democrats are struggling. It's a close race against Donald Trump because they now have as their nominee the most radical leftist the Democratic Party has ever put forth. But if they had put forth a moderate, like a Bill Clinton in the 1990s, someone who's got that kind of moderate image. Now, you and I know they're not really moderates. They just masquerade as moderates, okay? But they pull it off. Kamala Harris can't pull it off. But if the Democrats had nominated someone who's got a moderate image and could get the public fooled into thinking that they're moderates, they'd be winning in a landslide. So both parties have nominated very badly flawed candidates.
I asked you this earlier about Joe Biden. You said that about former President Clinton and some of his remarks. Do you think that like him and Hillary, when they look at this candidate, that as many battles as they've been in campaigns, that they're just, I mean, deep down, they don't want to see her win because you're handed the clearest, easiest path ever to the presidency after all they went through?
Well, I'm sure they have some hesitancy about Hillary Clinton not being the Democrat ticket leader, but I don't see a lot of difference between Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. They're both repugnant to my values. But if they'd gotten somebody different, then yeah, the outcome would be different. We would be doing a whole lot worse if the Democrats had gotten someone who is better. As far as their personal feelings in this campaign, the Clintons are like a lot of other Americans. For whatever reason, a large segment of America hates Donald Trump with a passion. And so, the Clintons want Kamala Harris to win because their hatred for Donald Trump.
So, last one. Do you have a final prediction on who's going to win and who's going to take the House and Senate?
Well, if you had a gun to my head and made me guess, and it's strictly a guess, I would say that Donald Trump wins the White House, the Republicans win the Senate, the Democrats win the House of Representatives, but I have two huge caveats. One, how accurate is the polling? Because I'm like everybody else. I'm relying on the polling to have some semblance of reflection of what voter thinking is, okay? And number two, how much voter fraud are the Democrats going to get away with in this election, like they've done in a lot of other elections? I don't think that their voter fraud effort is as strong as it was in 2020. I think the Republicans have responded to some degree in order to safeguard the honesty of our election system so that we're better prepared to catch and stop voter fraud by the Democrats. But there's still going to be a lot of voter fraud, and in a very, very tight race, as the Commission on Federal Election Reform noted 20 years ago. You might see a winner be declared a loser and a loser declared a winner because the flaws in our election system identified by the Commission on Federal Election Reform, which was co-chaired by Democrat Jimmy Carter and Republican James Baker, Ronald Reagan White House Chief of Staff, those flaws have not been fixed. Rather, to the contrary, those flaws have been heightened, have been expanded, making it easier to engage in voter fraud activities. And so I'm very much concerned about the integrity of our election system, particularly in tight races. If someone's winning by 10 or 20 points, okay, not enough voter fraud there to affect the outcome in all probability. But when you're talking about razor thin elections, voter fraud may be what tips the balance.
I hear people more and more, I talk to them and they bring up, well, what happens when they just fool with the ballot boxes this time or machines? And are we getting to a point that we are no longer have confidence in the election, our electoral process? And
well, we shouldn't have confidence in it. It's got a lot of flaws and it needs to be fixed. But not having confidence in it and respecting it are two different things. There are no alternatives short of armed violence to our election system. And the checks that are in place that our Constitution provides. Again, keep in mind, it's the United States Constitution that says Congress shall be the ultimate judge, jury, and arbiter of who the next president is. Same thing with Senate, same thing with House. So Congress can overrule results if they lack the integrity that is needed to count them as if they were true and accurate.
I know we talked about the problems in a conversation one time. How do you think we would go about fixing these electoral issues?
Well, that comes down to voters. It's kind of a chicken and the egg, or a catch-22. If the voters start demanding that these flaws in our election system be fixed, then they will be fixed. But a lot of voters complain, but don't do anything beyond complaining. And of course, the Democrats that are reaping the benefits of voter fraud, they oppose efforts to impose integrity in our election system.
All right, Congressman, I believe that's all I have for you. Thanks a lot for talking with me today, and remember to go vote Tuesday.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, sir.
God bless. Good luck.
Thank you.